Therefore, in these verses, we see these words are being used once again interchangeably. In 1 Peter 5, 1 and 2, we find the elders which are among you I exhort, who am also an elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, and also a partaker of the glory that shall be revealed. Verse 2, feed, once again to tend, the verb form of pastor. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking oversight thereof, not by constraint, but willingly, not for filthy lucre, but of a ready mind. Therefore, once again, we see these words being used interchangeably. Now, some, reading the Bible casually, assume these all refer to different offices. Sadly, many in the religious world today want to refer to a preacher as the pastor, and they call him the pastor. But look at the New Testament. We do not find anyone wearing the title pastor. We find instead these terms always used in the plural, two or more. We never find a preacher being called by a title to separate himself from someone else. Now, Jesus called the 12 the apostles. He separated. He set these men apart. We find that when this term was used, it was used as a divine designation. But isn't it interesting? We don't read in any of the letters that Paul wrote of him calling himself Pastor Paul. We don't find Peter calling himself Pastor Peter. They refer to themselves as apostles because Jesus gave them and appointed them to that office or that work. I don't wear a name as pastor, as a title. A pastor is an elder, a bishop, a shepherd. And it's as right to call a man one of those other names interchangeably as it is pastor. Brethren, we need to be able to talk with people out in the religious world about this. Sometimes I hear brethren give in and they'll call a denominational preacher by that terminology. That's wrong. It's wrong on our part. It's wrong for us to sit silently by. We need to be able to teach people and talk about these things in a very simple way. Now, I want to make a couple of observations here. First of all, scriptural elders are assigned to an important work ordained of God. They should be highly respected as servants of God, and because of this, they should conduct themselves so as to demand proper respect. I would suggest along this line that if a man is qualified, if he meets the qualifications that we're going to be discussing in this series, this is not a problem on his part. We must follow an eldership, or they cannot do their work effectively. Second of all, men should prepare themselves for the work of elders. They should be chosen only according to the qualifications that are found in Scripture. One is not going to be an elder accidentally. One is not going to one day suddenly decide, I think I want to serve as an elder. It's not going to happen. That's not going to happen any more than a man one day is going to decide that he wants to be a brain surgeon. You wouldn't go to a man who decided that yesterday, would you? Would we trust our souls and the souls of our community to a man who has not prepared himself and qualified to serve in this great work? Number 3, perfection should not be expected of an elder or an eldership, except in meeting the physical qualifications that God has given. Now, spiritually, there's always going to be room for growth. Elders should grow and mature just like every other Christian. They are not on a plane up here of perfection. They will be constantly growing. Again, if they're qualified, that's not going to be an issue. Now, Titus had a task given by inspiration, given by the Apostle Paul, of appointing elders on the island of Crete. In Titus 1 and verse 5, he said, "Here's the reason, Titus, that I left you behind. Paul has moved on. Why? That thou shouldest set in order the things that are wanting, and ordain elders in every city as I appointed thee. If you've had the opportunity of going in and planting a congregation, of sowing the seed, of seeing a congregation begin literally from the ground up with new converts, you better understand why there are things to be set in order. When I went into Russia for the first time in 1991, we established a congregation in a city of 200,000. And there were various American preachers and groups going in about once a month. But often the preaching that we were doing was first principles concerning how to be saved. What must I do to become a Christian? What must I do to be saved? Heaven, hell. While there was some teaching and preaching concerning the church per se, that work was neglected. And after a period of a little less than a year, a denominational preacher came in and was accepted by these people to preach for them. Why? They didn't know better. They had not been grounded. No doubt, even with Paul, as he went along the various cities of the island of Crete, he was only able to spend a limited amount of time. And there was continued teaching that needed to be done, as there was anywhere. Now, Paul had been there. Remember the island of Crete, by the way, this was south of Greece. Titus was with him. We don't know who else might have been. But Paul had enough confidence in Titus to leave him behind with this great task. Now, Titus was to set in order the things that were wanting. Paul doesn't detail what all was involved in this. What I suggested perhaps was some of it. There may have been other things that developed that Paul simply did not have time to deal with. But nonetheless, he was to correct their problems, but specifically, he was given the job of appointing elders, according to Titus chapter 1 and verse 5. Where were they to be appointed? In every place where qualified men could be found. In verse 13 of chapter 1, Paul said, "This witness is true, wherefore rebuke them sharply, that they may be sound in the faith." This would also be implied in setting in order the things that are wanting. In chapter 2, beginning with verse 1, throughout the very early part of that chapter, we find instructions given to various age groups within the church. And then in chapter 3 and verse 10, notice Paul says, "A man that is a heretic after the first and second admonition, reject." Someone had to take the lead. Someone had to begin this process, especially before elders were appointed. So this would be included in this idea. But Titus was also given the job of appointing elders in every city on the island of Crete. Now, with other passages in view, we find that this directive required Titus to do what? To appoint not an elder or pastor or shepherd, but a plurality. A plurality, two or more elders in every city. Now, each congregation in Asia Minor, we know, had a plurality of elders. How do we know that? Acts 14 and verse 23. "And when they had appointed them elders in every church, and had prayed with fasting, they commended them to the Lord, on whom they believed." Brethren, a very important rule of Bible study is understanding the difference between singular, one, and plural, two or more.